Publications the weekend from the left, right and centre agree that Keir Starmer has been, to put it kindly, underwhelming as Prime Minister. They all conclude that the only reason he is currently surviving at number 10 is because Labour can't agree on an alternative. The left of the party are scared of Wes Streeting, the right of the party are scared of Angela Rayner, the country is scared of Ed Miliband. Meanwhile, Labour's most popular retail politician, Andy Burnham, is ineligible for the job, sitting as he does in Manchester rather than Westminster. Following another damaging week and further fallout from the Peter Mandelson debacle, the chances of Starmer hanging on post the May elections seem remote. However, Labour's inability to unite around a single alternative candidate means that a challenge to Starmer's leadership could be messy for the party, but more importantly, for the country. I'm Frank McKenna, and this is the Downtown Den Politics Podcast.
The return of the sausages.
All sorts of things that I would have wanted as a kid that I couldn't have, right? Famously, Sky TV.
How'd that happen? I guess I just forgot what was going on.
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats.
So as ever, I'm joined by my fabulous colleagues, Joe Phillips and Jim Hancock, and we will reflect a bit later in this podcast on a cracking parliamentary reception that Downtown and Business hosted in partnership with the Northern Power Towns organisation on Wednesday, looking at all things devolution for Cheshire, Lancashire and Cumbria, and also we will be avoiding football talk because Joe Phillips will just take the mickey out of me, having West Ham just defeated Everton at the weekend. How did Plymouth get on, Jim? I stopped looking out for your results after you told me playoffs were probably improbable.
Well, despite the fact our goalkeeper was sent off after 5 minutes for handling the ball outside the box and being the last man, I believe. We beat Port Vale 2-1. I mean, and Port Vale playing as a relaxed relegation side, very difficult to beat. But it's going to be all to no avail. We do go into the last game, but it's between us, Luton and Stevenage, and I just don't think we're going to do it.
I know that you were saying a couple of weeks ago that your arch rivals Exeter City were doomed, but they've still got a slight chance, haven't they?
They're at home to Bradford City on Saturday, and I'm sure the glorious Bantams of South Yorkshire will do the business.
Oh, bitter green, Jim, bitter green.
West Yorkshire,
anyway,
actually.
Let's get on to politics. And it's been another torrid week for Keir Starmer. As I mentioned, Jim and I, along with many from the Downtown Network cohort from the county regions across the Northwest, were in Westminster this week, and there was a feeling really of dread and doom across the Parliamentary Labour Party, where I think it's fair to say they are all struggling with Keir Starmer's performance as Prime Minister. The latest debacle, of course, is all to do with this continuing fallout from the Peter Mandelson appointment as American ambassador. And the sacking of a civil servant called Ollie Robbins. And I've read, as I'm sure you have, Jim and Joe, all of the various records of why this dismissal was made and how Ollie Robbins has become the latest of many sacrificial lambs that Keir Starmer has decided to put to the slaughter. I'm still baffled as to why he had to be sacked. A reprimand, perhaps, but it seems to me that this firewall that exists between the civil service and government, which is long-standing practice, was simply something that Ollie Robbins was applying as part of this process. It also seems to me that as a civil service who's trying to deliver for the government, something the Prime Ministers for many years now have complained is not the case. The civil service are blockers and they try and get in the way of decisions that the government wish to make. It was very clear that number 10 wanted Peter Mandelson to be the American ambassador, and therefore Ollie Robbins, I think, quite reasonably has thought, well, this is information the Prime Minister doesn't really want to know anyway, and process prevents me from telling him this information. The whole thing is a total and utter mess. I think it goes to the point that we've made on many occasions on this podcast, which is that Keir Starmer does not have any politics. And I think worse, we're now in a situation where we have a lame duck Prime Minister without the governing party, that big old Labour parliamentary party with a huge majority, unable to get rid of a man they think is not up to the job because they can't agree on who should replace him. Jim, it's a total and utter mess, isn't it?
Well, yes, there's an awful lot to deal with, and you'll stop me before, otherwise my answer will be too long, because we can deal with two things here. One is the sort of inquiry and all the stuff around Robbins and the civil service, and the current political situation. So perhaps I'll sort of concentrate on the Robbins thing first of all. Yeah. I think what has shifted the dial, because as you know, I've always been of the view that Keir Starmer, because of the international situation, because of the local elections, because of the no alternatives that you've outlined, was probably safe, in inverted commas, in his job. But I think the revelations, the calm revelations by Ollie Robbins, the sort of the stiletto of an otherwise well-mannered man, they're not showing any anger, but revealing to everyone that Starmer had tried to get an envoy job for Lord Doyle, whose credentials for such a post would be slim at least. That, I think, it's a sort of subtext in a way, but I think it has caused this move of the dial. I was in the gallery for Prime Minister's Questions before we had the lovely downtown event, which we'll come on to later. And I went down to the what's called the huddle in the lower reporters gallery afterwards. And we persistently questioned the government spokesman on whether it was Starmer's idea. And all he would say, well, it went away, it never came to anything. That was the response. So clearly the honest response was yes. And apparently on numerous occasions, according to Ollie Robbins, he was pushing this guy. So we've got someone here who, as you say, doesn't seem to understand the role of the civil service, the appropriateness of appointments. And I think that's what started to shift the dial. But you're also right about the seriousness of the dismissal of Ollie Robbins. Apparently, one hears that Starmer can be quite ruthless. Apparently, when he's in conversations with people and he's delivered his message, he's prone to put the phone down on them. So there's obviously this building resentment about this. The civil service are clearly in disarray. I mean, they have been under attack for years. It was Michael Gove who called them the blob. But, Robbins came over as a really decent man. And, one concludes that famous old thing here, Keir Starmer's a man who lays down his friends for his life.
Yeah, let me read you this. It's a fairly long paragraph from Tom McTague, who is the editor at New Statesman, and has written a lead story this week about Starmer. The events of the past fortnight, he says, have cast this collective failure in a spotlight so glaring it is impossible to unsee the ugliness that has been revealed. In one sense, nothing new has been exposed. We have long known that the Prime Minister made a poor political judgment in appointing Peter Mandelson as ambassador to the US, a decision for which he was paid a painful political and repeatedly apologised. But that fateful decision is not the reason his premiership is failing. No more than Johnson's premiership failed because he decided to defend Christopher Pincher from sexual assault allegations. The reason Starmer's premiership is failing has been exposed in the very way he's chosen to fight for his survival, revealing a far deeper breakdown in leadership than one lapse of judgment. What we have seen this month is a demonstration of how the Prime Minister practices politics, how he wields power, and how he holds everyone else to account but himself. A form of leadership not particular to one decision, but to one man. And that, Jim, really focuses in on what you said, a ruthlessness for survival, but not, Joe, a political route map or a vision to get the country where it needs to be.
No, and I mean, there are so many things here. One is it's important to point out that when he was Director of Public Prosecutions, Keir Starmer actually was a civil servant. He did have that role as the equivalent to a permanent secretary. So he should know better than any other Prime Minister how the civil service operates. And you would have thought that there would be an element of loyalty or sort of camaraderie between that, knowing how they work and knowing that civil servants can't defend themselves against politicians who have been, as you say, calling them the blob and accusing them of being lazy. I think what we have seen, and I think the revelation about Matthew Doyle, as Jim said, was more jaw-dropping than anything else. I mean, bear in mind, Matthew Doyle is now in the House of Lords, but he's been stripped of the Labour whip. The government were told that he had been involved in supporting a man who has subsequently been convicted of child sex offences, in between nominating him for a peerage and him taking his seat. So there was time to withdraw that. But actually, when I worked in press offices, we always used to say, shall I Google that for you, to idiotic journalists. Anybody with half a brain could have looked at Matthew Doyle's profile and seen him wearing a T-shirt supporting this bloke who was a former Labour councillor. And I just think Keir Starmer has shown himself to be not just ruthless, but vindictive and cowardly. He won't take on his own backbenchers over welfare reform. He won't take on, he won't get Bridget Phillipson to get her bloody finger out and sort out single-sex spaces a year on from the Supreme Court ruling. And he's going to make a speech today about shoplifting. I mean, really, is that the best you can come up with? The only thing you can say about Keir Starmer is that he has done really well internationally. He certainly has put Britain back as a measured, sensible ally that you can do business with, and he's brought us closer to Europe. That, I think, is in his favour, and he probably would have been quite a better Foreign Secretary with another thing. But I think it's absolutely clear that you can see cabinet support is draining away, and the only way he will stay is because there is no one to replace him. Does the country want another several months of turmoil and infighting? We had all that before, and you do that, you let Reform or the Greens in. So, it's time actually that Keir Starmer put the country first, which he says he does, and the sacking of Ollie Robbins was such a misjudgment. It's a bigger misjudgment actually than appointing Mandelson.
Yeah, and I think the mess that he's got himself into, again, comes back to this problem that he's got no political instinct. In the immediate reaction from me or from somebody who was human and, has, as I say, some political antennae, when all the revelations about Mandelson emerged, would have been, I think the British public would have appreciated this degree of honesty. Look, we knew that Mandelson was a risk. We appreciated some of the issues around him. Everybody knew about his association with Epstein. That wasn't something that came out of any due diligence. It was out there for all to see. As you say, Joe, Google it. It was there. We took the risk. We knew that we were dealing with an unpredictable president. We thought that Mandelson had the personality and the charisma to deal with this guy. In fact, if you look at the performance of Mandelson in that role, he done a pretty decent job. He got a decent trade deal for us. He kept Trump in a place with the UK in terms of the relationship where many other countries failed. But it's backfired. And where previously I've been criticised for being too cautious, I'm now being criticised for taking a risk. What do you want me to do? Throw yourself on the mercy almost of the British people and say, yeah, I got that one wrong, but it was for the right reasons. Instead, he turns into the lawyer. He starts to embroil himself in the red tape and the bureaucracy of due diligence processes and security services, and well, they didn't tell me this and they didn't tell me that. The lack of curiosity, again, something that we've criticised him for. And ultimately, he looks like a man who is weak, who doesn't ask the right questions at the right time, or worse, is a liar. And in the end, Jim, for me, as I say, in that initial response, had he simply said, I took the risk, it's backfired, we're moving on. The story suggesting it goes away, but it's not half as big as it's become.
Yes, the problem now is that it's crowding out everything else that the government is doing, and one has to give credit to the government. Things are happening. Energy bills are at the moment lower because of government action. The minimum wage, new employment laws, which you may or may not agree with, but that's what Labour supporters expect a Labour government to do. But all the news of all those sort of things are drowned out. I mean, again, going back to my attending the lobby huddle, before we ever got to ask any questions, the government spokesman read out a whole lot of things about Peter Kyle's going to Silverstone to support the motorsport industry, and other ministers going to Hastings to launch some initiative on housing benefits. The Prime Minister's meeting somebody from the European Union. Questions? Mandelson.
Yeah.
Nobody was interested in anything else, and that's projecting itself into. And I mean, I imagine campaigning in the local elections for Labour candidates is an absolute nightmare. Although I have to, in fairness, report Darren Jones, who's the Chief Secretary, said yesterday he'd done a sort of local town hall for 2 hours in Bristol, and nobody asked about Mandelson. Now, I think two things can be true with this, that there's probably no, in my experience, and probably yours as well, people don't tend to raise the issues that journalists are interested because they've got their MP and they want to get over their local grievance and so on. But I'm sure Jones would have to agree that in the background of people's minds is a more general assessment of the government, and that's where I think the damage is. I mean, I don't know whether we're going to go on now to what happens next, because it's getting really intriguing, because of course we've got these local elections which they were going to be really bad, now they're going to be terribly bad, and the question is whether that is the trigger for doing something. And it all centres around the King's speech, because there is a feeling amongst opponents of the Prime Minister that if they don't move immediately, I mean, presumably they mean the weekend after the local elections with some candidate, and we can discuss that later perhaps, that the King's speech will sort of act as on we go, consolidation of the Starmer regime into the summer. So it's a very, very interesting political situation.
Well, I think the problem, as I said at the start in my introductory remarks, is that they can't decide upon an alternative candidate. Angela Rayner's still got problems with her tax affairs. And is, as I say, a concern to the right wing of the Labour Party. Wes Streeting's often been cast as the bogeyman for the left, and is also somebody who was close to Peter Mandelson. He would say he wasn't as close as people are trying to portray, but nevertheless, there was a relationship there, undoubtedly. And then Ed Miliband sort of emerges as the dark horse. He'd be a disaster. I'd struggle to vote Labour with Miliband in the top job, I have to say. And then you come to the Andy Burnham conundrum. And of course, well, how many obstacles does Andy face? He's got to find himself a seat. He's got to win that seat. He's then got to get himself into Parliament. He's then got to get himself 80 MPs to support him. And of course, an awful lot of this new intake within the Parliamentary Labour Party don't really know Andy Burnham. So there is no guarantee that Andy even gets himself onto the ballot paper, even if he is in Parliament. So all those sort of issues, and at the moment, all the polls tell you that the only Labour politician who will perform significantly better than Keir Starmer is Andy Burnham, and he's not even on the pitch. So it's difficult, Joe, to see immediately after the elections, or any time soon for that matter, a genuine challenge emerging.
Yeah, I agree. And also, I think, I think it's very instructive. I don't think people are talking about Mandelson. They don't like Keir Starmer. And I think that goes right back to the very beginning of his premiership, when he got the free glasses and the suits, and people thought, oh God, here we go again. I don't think most people give a toss about Morgan McSweeney or Sue Gray or Matthew Doyle or Peter Mandelson, but what they do give a toss about is somebody who came in. He wasn't exciting, he was as dull as ditch water, but who looked like he was going to be a steady pair of hands. And what he has proved to be is a very unsteady pair of hands. And as we've said, from goodness knows, from the day they won the election, if they had been better at communication and if they had been better at PR, they would have spotted some of these things and avoided them, or they would have done what Tony Blair with Alistair Campbell and Mandelson did back in the day, which is to have a rebuttal unit and say, yeah, okay, we got it wrong. Next question, thank you. We're going to Scunthorpe to talk about X, Y, and Z. And they haven't done that. So they've allowed these things to fester. And I don't think that there is any, I'm not even sure there's an appetite within the Labour Party for a leadership contest. It would take an awful lot of resources. We've got Trump in the White House. We've got war in Ukraine. We've got goodness knows what going on in the Middle East. We've got cost of living crisis. There are too many more important things, actually, than who leads a limping Labour government into the next election, for people to take their eye off the ball and for money and time and resources to be spent. And I think it would be far better if Keir Starmer, although I don't know if he's got it in yet, having read that interview in the Sunday Times yesterday, you actually say, right, I will go in the autumn. So you work it out amongst yourselves, sort out who's going to be, and we'll have an orderly transition. We cannot afford to waste time on a leadership contest, because unless you've got an outright winner, you're still going to have factions within the Labour Party.
I think the problem that people perhaps don't appreciate is that you have within the Labour Party a very complex and complicated process of replacing leaders. It's not like the Conservatives, where you can simply say, right, let's get the MPs together and within a week we can have all this sorted out. This is a difficult process. I mean, the Tories went through that terrible Truss and Sunak campaign, didn't they, before they made the decision to elect Liz Truss. But ordinarily what the Conservatives have been good at is getting the 1922 together, getting the grey suits to go in, ditch the Prime Minister, and then getting to the point of a single candidate. And so the transition from from Cameron to Theresa May, from Theresa May from Boris Johnson, and then from Truss to Sunak was all relatively seamless. It was just that Truss appointment which caused some difficulties because they had to have a leadership campaign. I don't know how Labour avoids that sort of 4-6 week leadership campaign. How would the market react to that? What are our allies thinking, as you say,
Exactly.
Jo, when all this is going on around us? And that brings me to my biggest concern, is that if you were to look at the field of the people that we know at the moment, unless somebody emerges, then the likelihood will be Labour MPs, almost out of panic and perhaps for good intentions and good reasons, would say, well, actually, Ed Miliband's got to be the one, because
Which would be disastrous.
He upsets less than anybody else.
Yeah.
And that's the problem, Jim. I think that unless and until, as I say, that the PLP can decide there's somebody who's going to be different, who we can get behind, who we can back, this is just going to be a problem for the Labour Party, even if Starmer is got rid of.
Yes, I have an historical reflection, and I think this was at a time when only Labour MPs decided on this thing, exactly 50 years ago.
Michael Foot.
No, 50 years.
Before
1976, Harold Wilson retired, and Jim Callaghan, after a vote of MPs, became Prime Minister. I mean, that was literally happening this time.
But Callaghan wouldn't have necessarily been seen as somebody who was an Ed Miliband figure, if I can put it that way. I think Michael Foot was the compromise candidate, wasn't he?
Oh, I see. You're referring to that. Yes, yes.
So Ed Miliband will be a compromise candidate, and I think the wrong choice. But you could well see how this parliamentary Labour Party, which, let's face it, can't make a fucking decision about anything, it seems to me, that's difficult, they come to that conclusion.
Well, let's just sort of run through it. I mean, there are suggestions that Angela Rayner's tax affairs are about to be resolved by Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, and about time too, I would say. I mean, we're all got stories about how frustrated we are when we try and contact the tax authorities about anything. So it's, in one sense, quite refreshing that even the great and the good, if that's how you describe Angela Rayner, is having the same difficulty. But I mean, to take 9-10 months to sort out the question of renting a property in Brighton, it beggars belief. So she may be, and furthermore, it is suggested by her supporters, the Inland Revenue will say nothing particularly to see here. So she may be freed from that incubus.
Okay,
I'm sure...
let me stop you there then, Jim.
Yeah, okay.
She's free to run. Okay, what happens to Labour's standing in the polls if Angela Rayner becomes Prime Minister?
Well, I mean, Labour's standing in the polls. I mean, I suppose they could go further down, but I mean, in a sense, could it be worse? So
it stays the same. I think.
Well, the other thing that's been suggested is that there's some conversations going on with Andy Burnham, where, and I still can't see Starmer agreeing to this, that Starmer actually says, I will be going late summer, and that allows the contest to go on. And then some MPs and all this is very fraught, by the way. I know what you guys are going to say. Stands down, allows Burnham to come back in the summer, so Burnham contests the election.
You've been drinking the Kool-Aid. You've been drinking the Kool-Aid that Greens usually drink. I don't see any of this happening. I don't see Angela Rayner. Let's take all of the plus points that Angela Rayner's got, which is she's a robust politician. She calls a spade a shovel. People in the north like her largely. And she's good on the stump and she can rally the troops. Can I, in all honesty, close my eyes and imagine her at a G7 gathering or dealing with Donald Trump or Zelensky or any of that stuff? Probably not, I have to say. And then I wonder what it does to the Labour Party internally, because, as I mentioned, the right wing of the party very, very sceptical of an Angela Rayner leadership. So I think that's difficult. Andy Byrne have already been through the difficulties that he faces. So you then...
Well, the other possibility is that the Parliamentary Labour Party and the Labour Party generally, faced with this ridiculous situation, suppress their desire not to have the person who clearly communicates best with the British people and is on the field of play, as you put it, and actually go for Wes Streeting. The Wes Streeting says the weekend after the local elections, this is horrendous, I'm putting my name forward, and I'm pretty sure we would get 80 MPs to support him. So a quick strike by Wes Streeting.
Okay. What about Yvette Cooper?
No. She's a busted flush. Frank, and it's a shame.
Well, if Ed Miliband's been
well, I know,
but you make a better point that there is no. We're not talking about any woman, which is another disgrace.
The only one.
Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon.
The only one is Shabana Mahmood, but she is loathed by the left of the Labour Party. And in fact, she was touted as the woman in the grey suit who would go from cabinet and say to Keir, your time is up. I think Yvette Cooper, she has served the Labour Party admirably, but she was Shadow Home Secretary for far too long. She didn't have a grip on it when she came in as Home Secretary, where you've seen Mahmood actually take control, make unpopular decisions, piss off her own colleagues, but look like she's doing something. And Ed Miliband, who sounds coherent and sensible on the radio, you just have to go, yeah. and that's a 5-minute interview. But again, I can't see him at a G7, and I think we've got to look at the bigger picture here. I just don't, I mean, unless you go for somebody, a complete dark horse like Al Khan's, you know, who is often mentioned. Now, you know, with the state of the world as it is, here you have an ex-serviceman, ex-special boat service. You know, he's very, very good on defence. He's a lot better than John Healey at the moment. You know, you have somebody like that. I think, you know, Jim's right. It's either got to be Wes Streeting for a quick one, or you wait and you just get on with your job and you say, right, we have got to deliver, because it's only by us delivering that we can actually overshadow Keir Starmer's appalling failures.
I think it's, as I say, a total and utter mess. I think it starts with the Prime Minister's lack of politics. The communication issues are partly as a result of the fact that there is no clear plan, and so it's difficult for any communications director of whatever talent and ability to get the government on the front foot. And as I say, I think this inability to be able to explain mistakes and sort of own them and own up to them in an authentic way has led us to where we are with Mandelson. But there's so many other things. You know, he's had 2 chiefs of staff. He's had 2 cabinet secretaries. He's sacked this high-profile guy from the Foreign Office, Ollie Robbins. There's a litany, a trail of destruction almost behind him in terms of the number of staff that have been hired and then sacked. And then you've got the Matthew Doyle situation that no doubt will come back to haunt him as well. So there's so many things around Starmer that you think, how's he going to survive? But then we come back to that conversation of, well, who's going to replace him? And we've not really come to any satisfactory conclusion this morning. So those local elections, again, Jim, I hear what you say. They are going to be disastrous for Labour. They're going to lose Wales for the first time ever. They're going to lose Scotland, not going to come even second place in Scotland by the looks of things. But I think that's baked in.
Yeah,
and the Labour MPs I was talking to last week, and I've spoke to several of them independently, were all saying the same thing. But where do we go from Keir? They couldn't see a route back for Andy Burnham. They couldn't see how either Wes Streeting or Angela Rayner could unite the party. And Ed Miliband is seen as, well, a bit grey, really, but could be, as I say, the awful compromise candidate in the end. We will see what this next 7 days, the local elections and beyond brings, but I think it's fair to say that the one thing we are agreed on is it's a total bloody mess, and we're not 2 years into this government yet. Now, there's still 3 years to go. I just can't see how Labour continues to bumble on, particularly given the press that we have in this country, which are determined to get Starmer out of number 10. And again, whether a new Labour Prime Minister would have a fairer, less torrid time with the media, well, there's questions over that as well. Right, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll be talking about that parliamentary reception that Downtown hosted, and Jim will be giving his thoughts, I'm sure, on what was, I thought, a very interesting parliamentary reception. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to the second part of this week's Downtown Den Politics podcast. Well, it was all a little bit gloomy, I think, in the first part of the programme, because we have a Prime Minister who appears to be fatally wounded, but nobody's going to put the final knife in his back, because we can't seem to agree on an alternative candidate. And if the 3 of us can't see a way out, then it's difficult to see how that massive parliamentary Labour Party is going to be able to navigate its way through that issue. But we will see. We had a parliamentary reception last Wednesday in the Commons. We were on that wonderful Westminster terrace. The sun was shining, and all the talk was of devolution for 3 county regions in the northwest of Lancashire, Cumbria and Cheshire, which includes, of course, that big economic hub that is Warrington, and great turnout of business leaders, about 100 people in the room, lots of MPs rocking up to see us as well. It was good to see Chris Webb, Paul Foster, Mayor Ellis from the Lancashire contingent. We also had Esther McVeigh come along from the Conservative side in Cheshire. We had Alison McGovern, the local government minister, as one of our speakers, and Tom Reardon, who is the envoy for the North, was speaking and contributing as well. The thing that strikes you when you get those sort of dynamic individuals in a room is that despite all of the doom and gloom and the things that we've been focused on for many months now around the internal politics of government, the Labour Party, and how the various mainstream political parties are performing, or rather underperforming, is the optimism that exists and the fact that devolution is seen as a potential game changer. And I wonder, actually, before we get onto the event and get your reflections on it, Jim, Joe, whether, as my colleague in the office, Martin Liptrot, said over the weekend in a LinkedIn post, maybe it's not the players that need to be changed. Maybe it's the game. And what he meant by that was, you know, more devolution, faster, quicker, fiscal powers, mayors who have a genuine opportunity to change things in their local regions.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. And I think, you know, the King's speech on May the 13th is an opportunity for the government to do a reset. And that's a way that people engage with politics, because at the moment, you know, although you see quite good turnout in local council by-elections, what you are going to see if there was an election tomorrow, I think the turnout would be below 20%, because people go there all the same. And I think that is the problem. Whereas if you've got devolution and people feel that you've got mayors who've got the fiscal and economic policies that can change apprenticeships, job opportunities, building, planning, and all of those things, people would engage a lot more. So, you know, the government has got an opportunity. You can announce in the King's speech, yes, devolution faster and quicker. You could announce changes. They will, it is expected, you know, announce the lowering of the voting age. They could also bring in PR. So you could do all of those things, which could actually change the game. And I think Martin's absolutely right, because the players across the board, Frank, are dismal. You know, I know we always tease Jim about going back in history, but when you look at players of the past, it's just awful, the calibre of people now. You know, whether they're Tories, Labour, Reform, Lib Dems, Greens, it's really pathetic. And what we've got now is the rise of people like Polanski and Farage, because they look different and because they look like they don't care about opinion polls. And you've got, you know, a new intake of Labour MPs who are terrified to do anything and have got no political stuff. But, you know, where are the Heseltines of today? Where are the, you know, where are the Harold Wilsons, you know, so foresighted in looking ahead to technology? What are we doing about AI? Oh, I don't know. We'll just do a deal with Palantir and hope it goes all right.
They're working in the private sector because they wouldn't contemplate public service when they're getting toxic media insults, threats to their families, and things like that. We'll never know the people that have not come into public service.
No, exactly. And, you know, and then you see something like last week's assisted dying bill, you know, talked out by the Lords.
Shocking.
You know, and I know there are very, very many arguments on both sides of that extremely emotive argument, but that was a deliberate scuppering of something, and that doesn't help with people's faith in democracy at all. And I think we are facing a terrible crisis, but you know, the government can reset, and I think Martin's absolutely right. The players are shit, so change the game.
Yeah, just on the point that you make about past politicians and calibre and quality and so on. I'm sure there are people listening to this podcast on occasion who think, oh, here they go again. You know, everything was better in the past and the politicians were better and so on and so forth. However, there is a series at the moment which I would highly recommend to people. It's the podcast, The Rest is History, and it's looking at the rise and regime of Margaret Thatcher. And of course, in the early days, they are talking about the referendum, the Brexit referendum of 1974, I think it might have been.
75.
And one of the guys who's on the podcast has suggested that you go and watch on YouTube clips of debates that took place during that time. And he said the breadth of knowledge and the depth of the conversation and debate between people like Enoch Powell and Barbara Castle against Roy Jenkins and Jim Callaghan. He said it's just night and day to what you see now.
Yeah.
Now, I think part of that is because people's attention span of that of a gnat these days, sadly, so they want their information quicker. But then if you look even to 97, which ain't that long ago, really, you've got to adapt, haven't you? As you said earlier, you've got to have people who say, okay, how can we get our message across in a efficient and effective way? People's attention span is less for politics these days, so okay, we moved into the area of soundbites, of course, with Blair and Campbell and Mandelson and so on, but now they're floundering, aren't they? And as you say rightly, Jim, people not really putting themselves forward for public offers because of the amount of stick people get. But that's a subject that no doubt we can look at in future episodes. One thing I do want to focus on our closing remarks, Jim, is because you were in attendance at that parliamentary reception with me on Wednesday. A great occasion, I thought, but also, as I say, a lot of positivity around in terms of transport connections, economic growth in those areas, and a genuine commitment and desire for Lancashire, Cumbria and Cheshire and Warrington to make a positive contribution to UK PLC.
Yes, I mean, we're all familiar with the difficulties. I mean, you know, Greater Manchester and the Liverpool City region were set up with relatively smooth political processes. There have been issues with regard to Warrington and Cheshire. You know, I think people in Cheshire thought Warrington would come to dominate it, so it's taking them a further amount of time to get their act together. And we've rehearsed Lancashire's problems in the past, but those representatives who were there at the downtown event from Lancashire were very positive, and hopefully the Red Rose County is now going to move on a smooth path towards combined authority with an elected mayor. Because you're right, you know, given the framework, and I've always been a framework person, I don't think you can have these things haphazard. So the whole country needs to have a fairly clear and something that people can understand, which is combined authorities with elected mayors, as Joe says, who can make important local decisions, more devolution from the government. And Alison McGovern hinted to us that that might be possible. Tom Reardon, of course, you know, when he talked about it, he did make a diplomatic reference to the Treasury's ongoing concern about devolving power behind the scenes over the years. That's been the real problem for devolution, is the Treasury criteria for infrastructure schemes and things like that. But, you know, as you say, if this structure can quickly get into place, all those energies that we saw from people, our good friends, downtown members, business people there, they've got the ideas, they've got the energy to get going, and that's almost irrespective of this national doom and gloom thing. You know, there was really, you know, doesn't matter, but there was really no talk about the Iran war at our event, because people are, you know, they can't do much about that, so they're focused on bringing jobs and things to the northwest and other regions that downtown operates in, and that's what I think is one of the valuable things about these downtown events, that we have our speeches, but they don't go on forever, and the networking is really, really important.
Yeah, and I thought it was great to see, you know, a lot of new faces there from our perspective who'd not been to downtown events previously, and genuinely got a lot out of the occasion, and were coming up afterwards and saying what a good event it was. But most importantly, and I think, you know, again, a reminder to our politicians of what matters to people, whether they're in business or within their constituencies. Nobody was mentioning Peter Mandelson either. It was about the issues of transport connectivity. It was about some of the challenges that small businesses and medium-sized businesses in particular are going to face with this new wave of employment law and legislation coming into play. Some concern around that. But then, the two mayoral candidates for Cheshire, or two of the mayoral candidates for Cheshire, Ben Fletcher, Conservative, Dan Price, Labour, were in the room as well. And it was great to see them not just chatting amongst people, but talking to one another and having a perfectly reasonable conversation about shared ambitions, aspirations, and why they think devolution can make such a difference to the areas that they hope to represent. So I was really pleased with the way the event went, and hopefully we will have an equally successful event on the 10th of June when we take the Liverpool delegation down to Westminster. That's who Prime Minister is by then, hey? The other thing I should mention, because I'm conscious of the fact that the West Midlands, other than Shabana Mahmood, who we have mentioned, of course, one or two times in the first part of the programme, has been a little missing from this week's episode. So just let me tell people that you will recall we spoke a few weeks ago now about Andy Street and Ruth Davidson setting up a think tank, I think is the best way of putting it, called Prosper UK. And Andy has been in touch, or I've been in touch with Andy, and we're going to do a series of events for the Downtown Network with Andy Street and his new Prosper UK movement, starting in Liverpool in June. And I'm sure that'll have some interesting conversations emerge from those roundtable events that we're going to host with Andy, and Jim will be coming along to one or two of them, I'm sure, and trying to persuade Ruth and Andy to join the Liberal Democrats. I don't think that's going to happen, but there you go. I'm sure he'll try anyway. Listen, it's been great to have your company. It's Bank Holiday Monday next week, so we won't be recording next Monday, but we will get a recording in next week in preparation for those all-important local elections. So,
particularly in Birmingham.
Particularly in Birmingham, it's a huge transformation likely to happen there, because it's all out, and you've got independence, of course, with the Palestinian issue firmly on the agenda. You've got reform strong in certain white working class areas on the more local level, and things that do matter to people. The bin strike continues. So yeah, lots and lots to talk about as far as the forthcoming local elections are concerned, and we will do that, I'm guessing, next Tuesday, but I'll have to talk to my colleagues and make sure that their diaries are free as well. Thanks for joining us this week. Hope you have a wonderful next 7 days. We'll see you sometime next week. Bye for now.